So what's new with DORA? If you hadn't heard, the 2025 report launched last week. If you haven't downloaded it yet, I encourage you to go do that. We'll drop a link in the chat in a moment. But it is filled with so many great insights, and it might take you a bit to get through it, but we will have sessions over the next several months where we'll have the authors of the report come in, give it a brief presentation, and then we'll have lean coffee discussions around them. Want to say a thank you to our research partners for this year's report and all of our sponsors. Without that, it wouldn't be possible. And without all of you, it wouldn't be possible. So this year we had almost 5,000 responses, and we also had where one of our researchers was doing qualitative research and spending time asking questions kind of one-on-one, and we have more than 100 hours of that to be able to pull this report together. And so I described a few slides from Nathan's presentation last week. If you missed it, or it was all of the authors, I encourage you to go to the YouTube channel and watch that. But kind of the big overarching piece was that AI's primary role in software development is really that to be an amplifier. And I thought this slide was a really great point. It's a bad system will be a good person every time. And so I think what we're seeing is if you don't have great software delivery and development practices yet, that AI can kind of pull out and show where that's happening. If you do have good practices in place, then you're seeing how it's really amplifying what you can accomplish. And so they kind of wrapped up in, you can think about ways that you can use it to help your existing workflows. In addition, how you might create something new with using AI. And so today, our goal with this, and this is a new format that we're trying, and I'm really thankful for Saul being brave and kicking this off for us, is the DORA guides, DORA Community Guides. We meet monthly, and we found ourselves spending a bit of time really talking about how we were experimenting and what we were doing, and realized that wouldn't that be really great if we could have those type of conversations with all of the community? And so Saul is kicking off this today. And what I ask is that, if you are working on experiments, and it doesn't have to be with AI, it could be any of the capabilities. If you're running on something, maybe you started a new form of communication within your organization. You could have some slides and talk about that. If you can reach out to us, and we'll get you on the schedule. And we hope to do this once a month, where we have a few different people share some demos, and then we'll have discussion around it. And so we can really kind of connect to what's happening out there in our teams and in our organizations. And with that, I'm going to pass that over to Saul.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let me just get my slides up and running. Perfect. All right. So first of all, thank you so much, Amanda, for starting us off. Thank you all for coming. I titled my talk sort of reconciling the vibe with reality, and it's sort of sharing a little bit of my journey. Today I'm going to go give a little bit of background, jump into a live demo after, show you some, pull up my code editors and, show you some of the different things I've been working on. And then, as Amanda said, we'll slide right into the lean coffee where, we'll have your questions and everything will be answered then. Feel free to use the chat to, talk amongst yourselves during the talk. And, one thing I would like to remind us, this was one of our DORA guides, Steve Fenton, had a really great sort of primer that, when we are, talking about AI, there's so much to talk about the topic. And, we want to make sure that, we sort of constrain the topic a little bit, check our enthusiasm. We're focused on, as practitioners, engineers, what can it actually do for us? We understand that there's a lot of hairy questions and things that we don't, have solved yet in terms of, impact on climate and energy use and all these kind of, how the models are trained. And, there's a lot of stuff on that. We're going to focus today on, practical steps. And I do have some fur babies, so apologize if you hear them in the background there. One thing that I'd like to acknowledge is progress isn't a straight line. What my journey is not going to be your journey. My journey today might be a little different tomorrow. And, when I'm sharing this information, it's just, my journey. The other thing I'd really like to think about was when I was experimenting with things is where is the actual value in, what I'm working on. So I'm going to wind back a little bit, and I really started back in June 5th, is when I'd heard of, I've done some vibe coding and, wrote a couple of scripts and everything. But what happened was I had this project where my grandma left me, boxes and boxes of journals going back to 1943. And I had 28,000 entries to scan in. And I thought, well, how could I, get all that done? I was thinking about, all the different tools available to me. And I thought, why not, see if I can code with AI. And I ended up developing this sort of weird process using Google AI Studio where, I wrote my prompt, I put my system prompt into the studio, I had it develop some, scripts and bash scripts to actually, add the, make changes to my code base and, run everything. And, it was kind of janky. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I was literally exporting all of my code from my Git repo, pasting it into the web browser. It was interesting. And, a couple months in, I started actually doing some more research and, realized that I was doing what I felt was, spec-driven development. I ended up, developing, instructions and, saying, hey, do things like this, like that. Vivek Haldart, he wrote a great article, exploring, what is spec-driven development. I also fell upon a talk by Pearson Harold, really splitting the journey out into 3 different steps. The first is vibe coding, which, you pull up your terminal, you just ask a question, and, all of a sudden you have code. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. Structured vibes, which I kind of felt where I was at was, you have a system prompt, you're giving it code, you're giving it some instructions, but then they talked about this third step, which was spec-driven development. And that's really having a set of ordered instructions to the AI agent to really help structure what's coming out, what you're working on. And I really, really like that. But even back when I was working on, the structured vibes approach where, I have my workflow, I import code, I, request a feature, bash script, all of that, it went pretty well. And I kind of settled on that, for the system prompt, it wasn't about the code. It was a lot more than that. I had to, develop, sort of act like a product manager, a mentor coach, a CTO, all of these different pieces together. And the system prompt really, really grew into this. It's like, a one-person coding shop with, requirements gathering, quality assurance. And, I have the slides here. I'll share them at the after the talk here. But, that's sort of where I ended up. My system prompt was not just about the code, but all the pieces around it. So fast forward, I, finally felt like I hit my stride when I was working on, a hobby project that I put off for many, many years. I never thought it was a cool idea. I have a template language. And, can I, upgrade it from a Tickle, which was really old, to something modern using TypeScript and, peg parser, modern stuff. And I was able to really get it done in a day, something that I'd put off for many years. And it really blew my mind. And I continued working on the project. And then I kind of took a step back and realized, wait a minute, AI can tell you and it can do a lot of things, but rule number 1, never try to roll your own template language or, try to reinvent the wheel. And AI is not great at telling you what not to do. It's going to be the yes person and just go for it and, go at it. It will try to implement whatever you try to tell it to. So I was really, really happy at that point. Actually, a couple days after that post, Google released their CLI, which really allowed me to move to the spec-driven workflow, which I was able to create a repository with all of my specifications. And step one, really work on architecture and decisions about how to build my system. And once I had that mapped out, moving on to okay, I want to add a feature to this project, and I start mapping out what the feature is. I map out what the user story, design, break it down into tasks. I have an inner loop where I'm sort of looking at all of those pieces before I even start the code. And then once I'm happy with what the feature looks like, I move into the implementation phase, review results. And this is a circular process. Sometimes I realize, or an iterative process, not circular, that, I needed to update my user story. The feature didn't work out the way I thought it was. And, so throughout this whole process, it's sort of a continuous learning process to implement things. This September, as Amanda was saying, I got really excited. I started publishing my specs. I actually spoke to a couple of people and, hey, how does this work for you? Does this work well? And I published them in a repo. GitHub has, their spec repo. I invite you to look at mine and, see, the instructions of the way things are set up. And I'll show that in the live demo later on here. And, we're now at the point where I actually just started Cursor just a couple of days ago. My primary tool had been the CLI just because I could use it with anything. I could use it with my terminal. VS Code is my IDE of choice. And, it's going to be fun to share all this with you all. So without further ado, I'm going to hop into the live demo zone. As always, there's caution. There were some questions that came in about, well, you can, a lot of people's experiences has been developing projects from scratch. And somebody asked, like, what does it look like if you're working on a non-AI or non-spec project? How does it work with that? And I'm going to go ahead and jump into that one. And without further ado, let's see. Stop presenting. All right. Okay. So I'm going to go over to GitLab, where I have a project that I've been working on. Okay, so this was a waveform viewer app written in Rust. I had been working on a new project to build some FPGA automated build or CI chains, and one of the missing pieces is to render waveforms from simulated FPGA software, and they don't really. The software is a little long in the tooth. There was one piece of software that's no longer maintained, but it's, I've never written a line of Rust before, and I thought, okay, let me go ahead and start this. So I popped up, and the first thing I did was I imported my specs. So what the specs look like is I split it into mainly 3 different sections. I have my core processes, and these are things that are like core engineering principles, how projects are managed, how to do development, how to, things that supplement development standards, like the softer things, like, whenever it's talking to me, I tell it to be a coach. I tell it to use gender neutral language. And the last is sort of, more specific general coding practices. And a lot of these, I borrowed from my own personal experiences, or I borrowed from looking at DORA.dev. And, it's just, I iterated a lot on this. The second group is sort of standards. And these are whenever I am, writing architecture documents, I have instructions on what is an architecture document. Decision, ADR records, like what do those look like? Design documents, user stories, tasks. And the last is sort of guidelines. And this is something I found whenever I ran into, a language that it wasn't familiar with, or it would repeatedly do the wrong thing over and over and over again. I created little lesson learned, documents. And so I have, a full set of guidelines and, like, for example, when I was using TypeScript, as much as I try to tell it, like, don't use any, like, use unknown, it continually tries to do those kind of things. And whether it's with, Gemini or Claude or whatever LLM flavor you end up using, these are general instructions that work with across all of them. So I'm really, really happy with that. So the next step I did was, okay, this is the spec project. Let me switch over to the, is this the right project? Yes. So, okay. So here's an example of a feature that I started designing. So this program, let me open up. It's a simple waveform viewer app. If you're not familiar with FPGAs, it's just, let's zoom in here. You have a bunch of different waveforms. You try to have logic to, set signals high or low, and you really just, want to verify, hey, if I have a counter that's, counting upwards and I have a reset signal that goes high, I want it to reset. And ideally in my CI flow, I'd love to have an image of this waveform around the reset going high so that I can quickly verify the design. And there isn't an open source waveform viewer out there that really can capture these images and render them offline, which is surprising because this is, this isn't new technology. And so what I ended up doing was developing a feature so I could export the waveform. I could do a test, go this to the desktop. And lo and behold, I can export an image of the waveform. And so I started this project last week. I had never written a line of Rust code before. And I felt, for me, coming into a new language, there's a lot to break down, and there's a lot of almost like writer's block of how do you even get started. And I feel the value add for coding with an LLM at this point is I know requirements gathering, I know how to describe the feature, but sometimes even just getting that first step, getting started of experimenting with the code base and seeing what works, I hold myself back, and maybe I shouldn't, but that's just, I know myself, and having the AI as a way to enter into this code base, try things out, compile, see what works, assisted me from getting going with this particular project. So I broke it down into a user story. I have my personas talking about two different use cases. The one person is really interested in verifying waveforms, in a CI environment. The other one is, just working on things and, wants a more GUI oriented interface. And then I ended up breaking it down into a couple of different, breaking down the design document, really going through sort of the technical details of, okay, this is what people want. How would I implement it in this project? I split down, and I have different tasks, which are really just like checklists. So, I have a menu item. I have, all the different steps that go out into the requirements. I, ask it to describe a little more in detail, how all of these things are broken down. And you can see, I can open some of these past histories, see, let's, all right. So here's an example of the chat where I asked it, hey, let's implement the, I was, going to build a new menu and realized, oh no, I'm actually getting a little scope creep. So I ended up breaking it out into an entirely new feature. And, I split out and I said, hey, I could continue developing and AI is going to continue letting me develop features, but I really need to pay attention to my own principles of keeping batch sizes small. So, I stopped work on this, one project. I went and let's go back to my browser. I created this draft, PR, and I said, okay, I'm just focusing on the first set. The first feature was, can I have a drop-down menu which I export my waveform? And I used the the LLM to help me create my PR stuff, PR information here. I edited a lot. I think that sometimes it includes a little too much information. But this to me, if I look at the set of changes, I have included here just for information, and this is in a draft PR, so people in this project can see, what is the full scope of the idea that I was working on. And it's really cool that I was able to flesh out, all of the details on what I want to do. I have, the code review, and I could definitely see where if you're not paying attention, initially it tried including code in a lot of different places, and I know that that's just junk, and I have to rein it back in a little bit and say, hey, no, this function really belongs together with this file. This particular application, it has a message queue, which whenever it's communicating between different parts of the program, it uses messages. And so I had to work with that and understand, okay, well, this code belongs here, that code belongs there. And one of the other pesky annoying things, which I yelled at the LLM the other day, was as best I tried to not include the cursor instructions into this project, I accidentally hit the allow on the LLM run git commands, and it went ahead and said, oh, great, we're going to just gonna add all the files in here and everything's going to go great. And I was like, now I'm going to have to step back and, create an entirely new branch, cherry pick all of the specific commits and, open up the final PR, just so that things are clean. Because I'm not going to enforce that we, include all these specs on a project that doesn't use specs. So that is my journey with this Rust project. And I thought it would be a little instructive to, spend a couple of minutes looking at, another project that I built from the ground up. And this was, I had a client who had, hundreds and hundreds of business cards and wanted them to get scanned in. And I was curious, like, okay, how can, let me build a system to automate that process. Once I scan them in, I just drop the images in a folder. And, it's been a while since I ran this project. I didn't leave it in the best of state. And so when I opened it up today, there was an error. And it said, hey, we got this unexpected keyword. And so I'm going to, sort of jump right in and try to see if I can't resolve this error in the next couple of minutes. I'm going to sort of time box this activity, and so we'll only do this for 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll end this portion of the talk, and we'll move on to the lean coffee. All right. So it's saying that there is this error. Go ahead into my IDE. Okay. So I opened up, this is Gemini CLI. It opens up right in the terminal. I just typed in, hey, help me fix this error. I got an unexpected keyword argument. I literally just copy pasted. And it's looking at a piece of code. It's recommending a change. And I have no idea what it's doing. And that's great. Let's see what we can do. Okay, what do you do? I generally talk to it, sort of brainstorming back and forth whenever, it's very conversational the way I interact with it. However, you cancel the operation, so no changes were made. Okay. Changes run unit tests. So I'm going to ask it to run some unit tests to see, like, hey, are things actually working the way that I thought they should work? Always a good idea to unit test. Okay, so I could see that I had all my unit tests are passing, but still this isn't working. So I'm curious at how that was working. New unit test that fails to replicate this error. And so I'm just introducing a regression test to say, hey, let's go ahead and add a new unit test to make sure that this test doesn't fail again. All right. And of course, it's always going to say cheerfully, you're right. Of course, you're right. It was saying sometimes my mocks would be too permissive. I generally gloss over this stuff because it's going to say whatever it wants. And until I read through the code and understand it myself, I really take anything the LLMs say with a grain of salt. Let's see. So it says that they're using a mock, which is why this wasn't failing in the first place. Cool. So now it's recommending a new test. And I can go ahead and look at the new test. Well, that's so like I'm reading through this, and already I can tell that it's a silly test because it's just replicating the error exactly. And I'm not telling it, so it thinks, oh, hey, if I just create a new mock object that throws the error, it's gonna, replicate this error. I'm like, no, that's not correct at all. So I have to go back and fight with the system right now to say, hey, no, that's not right. Without mocks, this error should exist. Create unit test that replicates the current failing behavior. All right, and I'm going to wrap up here because it's coming up on 5 minutes, and just sharing you a little bit into, you know, how I deal with the system, and a little bit of back and forth there. I want to thank you all for your attention and your kindness, and I look forward to the Lean Coffee discussion.
Saul, thank you so very much. So I'm thinking if everyone's okay with it, maybe we just do Q&A type where people raise their hand. We have talk just so because we've got about 22 minutes left, and I don't know if I want to take 8 minutes to kind of go through the Lean Coffee process. Does everybody think that's okay? This is our new a fun, we're learning together, right? We will iterate on demo and discussion day, but so this is just absolutely incredible. I have learned a ton. I've been working on a project to have the videos that we have at the beginning, have it auto-generate that, and I definitely took some things away, what you said, and I saw that David wrote this in the chat as well, but I think we're not very good at giving each other context, but we're getting much better at learning how to do that because we will do it, we will get it to the LLM, and I think that's been a really an interesting observation of myself, and so thank you so much for this.